usually around Christmas time and have dinner, and they would sort of close it down and we'd have like family dinners.
The year is 2024 and Graceland looks exactly the way the brochures promise. Tour buses idle at the curb while groups spill out into the Memphis heat. Phones already held high, ready to capture the first glimpse. Så vad säger du dagsabbathförin is the Vernon in Furry Winecorridor in a white-columned mansion at the top of the hill. Guides rehearse their lines, ticket scanners chirp at the entrance, and somewhere in the distance a speaker plays a familiar Elvis chorus that makes half the crowd sing along without thinking. For most people, this is the beginning of a dream they have saved for their whole lives. Yet, just a few steps off the path, at the far edge of all that noise and anticipation, a single piece of paper curls on a door that is not on any tour map. The door is plain enough that most visitors never really see it. It does not have a plaque above it or a velvet rope in front of it. It does not lead into the mansion. It faces away from the crowds, toward the pool and the quiet back corner of the property. This is the entrance to the Graceland pool house, a low, almost shy building that sits just far enough from the main house to feel like its own small world. Fans walk past in little rivers, pointing toward the windows of Elvis's bedroom, whispering about the jungle room, already thinking about the meditation garden where he is buried. Almost no one notices the narrow walkway that bends around to this door, and almost no one realizes that for decades, that handle has turned for someone who is not on the tour. For the public, the pool house exists as a rumor. They know the pool because that is where Elvis swam, where family photos were taken, where the water glowed under the lights on hot southern nights. They know the meditation garden because that is where they leave flowers and silent tears. But the small structure beside the water is usually described in passing, if it is mentioned at all. Guides keep the story moving toward the rooms they are allowed to show. The door stays closed, the blinds stay drawn. Guests return to their hotels, convinced they have seen every inch of Elvis Presley's world, without realizing that one part of that world still belongs to someone else. That quiet illusion cracks the moment you notice the paper taped to the pool house door. It is not decorative, and it is not there for tourists. The language on it feels like it has come from another planet. Words like premises, termination, and vacate sit uneasily against the image of Elvis's backyard. There is a date by which the occupant must leave, a contact for questions, a stern line about failure to comply. The name attached to all this is colder than anything inside the mansion's warm wood walls. The tenant is not marked as a cousin, a friend, or a trusted employee. On the document, they are simply John Doe. In a place where almost everything has a story, that anonymity feels strangely loud. The living room has a story. The piano where Elvis sang on his last night has a story. Even the driveway gate with its green musical notes and metal silhouettes has a story. Yet here, in the middle of the most famous home in rock and roll, is a human being reduced to a legal placeholder. No framed photo in the visitor center, no name in the audio tour, just a line in the paperwork and a notice that says it is time to go. If you could flip back through the ledgers that led to this moment, you would see that the story of this tenant stretches far beyond the date on the notice. Somewhere in the records, long before Graceland felt like a polished museum, there are payments logged for the pool house. Month after month, year after year, the same small line appears, quiet as a heartbeat. It suggests a life that has unfolded in the shadow of the mansion for almost half a century. While the estate changed hands, while fans grew older, while the world argued about Elvis's legacy, John Doe was still here, paying rent on a little building by the water. Inside that building, mornings must have started very differently from the way they begin for the tourists outside the gates. Instead of a hotel wake-up call and a shuttle ride, the day might begin with the sound of staff, prep in the grounds, the murmur of voices floating faintly from the front lawn, the steady hum of the filtration system keeping the pool clear and blue. The tenant could pull back the blinds an inch and see the top of the mansion through the trees, Watch the first groups file past with headphones on, listening to stories about a man he once might have seen walking across this very yard in the middle of the night. It is hard to imagine that anyone could live here for decades without the past seeping into everything. The pool house looks out onto the water that reflected Elvis's last summers, the path he walked when he came back from tours, the edge of the garden where his grave now lies. To live here is to share a backyard with history and with grief. Every splash in that pool once meant laughter, family, or, in the final years, exhaustion and escape. Every quiet night after 1977 carried the weight of absence. For the person inside the pool house, those memories are not lines in a guidebook. They are the view from the kitchen window. All of this might stay invisible if Graceland remained only a family home. But the modern story of this place is larger and more complicated. In recent years, Elvis's estate has faced legal storms that sound almost too wild to be real. Forged documents, fake loans, attempted foreclosures, and a granddaughter suddenly forced to defend the house she grew up visiting. Lawyers and judges now circle the same property that once held nothing more formal than a handshake agreement between a singer and the people he trusted. In that world, every piece of land matters. Every agreement has to be traced. Every quiet corner, even a pool house, is suddenly back under review. So now there are two ticking clocks at Graceland. One is loud and public. Court dates, headlines, statements from attorneys, a global audience holding its breath in fear that the gates might one day close. The other is small and painfully private. The countdown, printed on a notice taped to a door most visitors still never see. On one side, a legendary estate fights to stay whole. On the other, a single tenant counts the days until he has to pack up his life and step outside Elvis's backyard for the last time. The question hanging in the air is simple and unsettling. How did John Doe earn the right to live here for nearly 50 years? And why did it take until now, in 2024, for someone to finally tell him his time at Graceland is over? To understand how anyone could end up with an eviction notice inside Graceland, you have to rewind to a time when this place was not a landmark, not a brand, not a stop on a guided tour. In the mid-1970s, Graceland is still exactly what Elvis wanted it to be when he bought it. A real home. Cars come and go at odd hours. Friends drift in after shows, dropping onto couches with takeout bags and stories. Relatives visit for weeks at a time and never quite say when they are leaving. The house breathes with the rhythm of a family living under the same roof as a world-famous star who is trying, in his own way, to hang on to something normal. Around the edges of all that noise, there are people whose names do not land in fan magazines, but whose fingerprints are on everything. Groundskeepers walking the fence line before the sun climbs over the trees. Security men standing between curious fans and the front steps. Drivers who know exactly how to get Elvis out of the gate without attracting a crowd. Electricians, handymen, men who can fix a leak in the middle of the night and quietly disappear before anyone wakes up. One of those men, over time, starts spending more nights in a small room at the back of the property than in whatever modest place he used to call home. John Doe does not arrive with a grand introduction. He blends in with the working rhythm of Graceland. Maybe he started as a watchful presence by the gate, then shifted closer to the pool, taking care of the equipment that keeps the water clear and the lights working when Elvis wants to swim at 3 in the morning. Over years, he becomes the person you call when a pipe bursts, when a storm knocks something loose, when a late delivery has to be met at the back drive instead of the front. People in a house like this learn quickly who actually keeps the place running, and John quietly becomes one of those people. Elvis values loyalty in a way that goes far beyond job descriptions. He remembers who showed up when others vanished, who stayed late without being asked, who treated his family with respect when the cameras were not around. On nights when the pressure from shows, money, and expectation becomes too heavy to push aside, he talks to the people who feel safe. That might be a cousin, a bandmate, or a man like John who has seen him tired, seen him irritated, and never tried to sell those moments to anyone. In that private world, promises are not always ink on paper. They are words spoken in kitchens and on porches, over coffee or late-night sandwiches. From John's vantage point, none of those conversations are visible. What he experiences is a subtle change in the air. Staff seem more focused, more distracted by things he cannot see. There are more meetings with outside suits. New badges appear on the lapels of people who walk the grounds while checking things off on tablets. Official cars with unfamiliar logos pull into the service entrances. The mood shifts from steady routine to something watchful and tense. Eventually, the internal debate crystallizes into action. A letter is drafted, reviewed, edited, and approved. It cites dates, clauses, and terms. It balances polite language with firm instructions. It carries the weight of a corporate decision, even if the words look simple on the page. That letter is placed into an envelope bearing a return address tied to the legal and business structure that now shields Graceland from threats. It makes its way through the Santendat, postal system, or an internal courier path and ends up exactly where decades of habit have led it, in the small mailbox outside the door of the pool house at the edge of the property. John finds it waiting there one day, mixed in with the usual small stack of bills and flyers. The envelope feels heavier than it should, the paper inside thick and official. He stands in the doorway that has been his threshold for most of his adult life, holding a decision made by people he may never have met. Inside those folded pages is the next chapter of his story at Graceland, and for the first time, the promise that once felt unshakable is about to be tested by a world that no longer makes decisions with a handshake. When John finally opens the envelope, it is not a surprise so much as a confirmation of something he has felt in his bones for months. The tone around the estate has shifted. More questions, more audits, more people in suits talking about risks and liabilities. Still, seeing the words laid out in neat paragraphs hits differently than any rumor or half-heard conversation. The letter explains that the tenancy is ending, that the estate needs full control of every structure on the property, that he has until a specific date to vacate the pool house he has called home for nearly half a century. It is polite, professional, and utterly final. He reads it twice, not because he does not understand, but because his mind keeps slipping sideways into memory. This doorway is where Elvis once walked past with a towel slung over his shoulder after a late swim. These steps are where Vernon stood while pointing out something that needed fixing in the yard. The language in the letter carries none of that. It speaks only in terms of premises and occupant, as if the life that unfolded here can be reduced to a line in a file. For the first time, John feels the distance between the world he entered as a younger man and the world now making decisions about him. In the days that follow, the familiar rhythm of his life shifts into a quiet countdown. Closets that once held a manageable clutter of jackets, work boots, and shirts become a series of choices. Which things go with him and which belong only to this place. He pulls out old boxes he has not opened in years. Inside are tiny fragments of a life spent in Elvis's orbit, a faded staff badge from the first years of public tours, a program from a memorial event, a key that no longer matches any lock but that he keeps anyway because someone once pressed it into his hand and told him to hang on to it. Each object he touches carries a memory that the estate will never log. He remembers patching a fence minutes before a tour group arrived. He remembers late-night conversations with other staff members when the house was quiet and the world outside seemed very far away. He remembers the first time he heard that Graceland might have to be sold and the relief that washed through the property when the museum idea worked. None of those moments are written into the letter telling him to leave. To the legal system, this is a standard termination. To him, it feels like someone is erasing a story one room at a time. As the move-out date approaches, John finds himself taking longer, slower walks around the grounds. He is not on the official tour path, but his footsteps trace routes he has walked since the 70s. Past the mansion side, where he once saw a very tired Elvis leaning in a doorway, trying to decide whether to go out or stay home. Past the trees that have watched fans line up by the thousands for candlelight vigils. Past the edge of the meditation garden where the Presley family rests together in a place that has become both private grave and public shrine. Every step reminds him that he has lived not just beside history, but inside it. Standing near the pool, he lingers in the stillness that settles over the property when the last visitors leave. He remembers how different it felt when Elvis was still alive, when the water glowed at night and laughter floated across the yard. This pool has reflected so many versions of Graceland. The family home, the grieving house, the struggling estate, the museum finding its footing, the empire defended in court from people who tried to steal it on paper. Through all those changes, his little building watched from the edge. Now the reflection has shifted again. The pool house light will soon be dark. People naturally want a neat answer to the question in the title. Who was living in Elvis's pool house until 2024? The truth is that official records give us less than our curiosity craves. On paper, he is John Doe, a placeholder name attached to a long-term tenancy that lasted decades longer than anyone could have predicted. Maybe he began as security or a groundskeeper or a handyman whose loyalty earned him that space. Maybe he had a closer tie to the family than outsiders will ever know. The details are blurred, not because the story lacks importance, but because some lives at Graceland were never meant for the spotlight. What we can say with confidence is that he represented something bigger than one man's housing arrangement. His presence in the pool house was proof that Graceland, for all its branding and ticketing, still carried echoes of the way Elvis treated people he trusted. A promise made in a simpler time managed to survive layers of corporate restructuring, ownership changes, and legal storms. It only ended when the pressures of the modern world, security, liability, the need to audit every line, finally caught up with a handshake from the past. After John leaves, Graceland does not stop. The tours continue. The gates open each morning. Riley's legal battles ensure that foreclosure schemes and fraudulent claims are pushed back, and the estate remains in the family's hands. Fans still cry at the meditation garden, still whisper in the hallways, still feel as if they are stepping into Elvis's world for the first time. Yet something subtle has shifted. With the pool house dark, there's no longer a private, unseen life unfolding at the edge of the property. Every inch of the grounds now belongs either to the public story or to private family spaces behind heavier, more guarded doors. In a way, John's departure marks the closing of a bridge between eras. The man who lived quietly beside the pool carried the memory of a time when orders were given face to face, when gratitude sounded like, "You stay as long as you need to?" When the estate ran more on trust than on legal language, his eviction does not mean that the people now running Graceland care less. It means the world around them has changed so much that even old promises have to pass through lawyers' hands. The house on the hill remains, but one of its last living ghosts has been asked to step outside the gates. In the end, the question, who was living in Elvis's pool house, becomes less about a name and more about what it means to belong to a place like Graceland. John Doe was a reminder that legends are built not only on songs and fame, but on the unseen people who lock doors, fix pipes, and walk the perimeter long after the cameras are gone. His years in that small building tell us that Elvis's home was still a home for someone, even as the world lined up to buy a ticket to see it. If you stayed with this story to the end, you are not just visiting Graceland, you are looking for the people hidden in its shadows. Do you think the estate was right to end John Doe's time there, or should the promise have stood? Share your thoughts and subscribe for more Untold Elvis stories.
I'm really happy when I'm here. It always reminds me of when I was the happiest, I think, in my life.
Nobody expected to see Priscilla Presley's name back in bold letters on a lawsuit this late in the story. For many fans, the Presley family timeline felt settled. Elvis was gone. Vernon was gone. Lisa Marie, the only child who carried his face and his voice, was gone too. Graceland still stood on the hill in Memphis. The tours still moved through the rooms. The music still poured out of the gift shops. And in recent months, Riley Keough seemed to step quietly into a role that made sense to everyone watching from the outside. The calm, steady granddaughter who would carry the legacy forward. Then new headlines started appearing. They were not about a remastered album or a movie deal. They were about court documents. They were about accusations. They were about a fresh lawsuit that pulled Priscilla Presley into another public battle. This time with people who claimed she had gone much further than anyone realized. In a world that already felt tired of legal drama around the Presley name, this one still managed to send a shock through the fan base. For decades, Priscilla had been a symbol of continuity. She was the young woman in the wedding photos, the ex-wife who still stood at the funeral, the former military bride who turned into the poised businesswoman on talk shows. When people thought of Graceland's surviving tax bills and looming bankruptcy, they thought of Priscilla walking through those empty rooms and deciding to fight for Elvis's world rather than let it be sold off piece by piece. She did not just outlast the chaos. In many ways, she organized it. That is why this new lawsuit feels different. In these recent court papers, former business partners do not describe her as a grieving widow of a legend or a careful guardian of his memory. They describe her as someone who allegedly misled them about what she could offer, what she owned, and what she was allowed to sell. They claim that behind the public image of the dignified keeper of Elvis Flame, there was a woman willing to twist the truth to protect her own interests. They even tie their accusations back to the painful period around Lisa Marie's final months and the fight over her estate. Priscilla's camp fires back with equal force. Her attorney calls the claims shameful. He insists that she is the person who was actually taken advantage of, that these same partners misused her trust, mishandled her money, and now hope to pressure a settlement by dragging her name through the mud. He points out that Riley herself has stood beside her grandmother and supported her in public. From their point of view, this is not a heroic attempt to reveal a secret. It is an attack. So who is right? The truth is that lawsuits almost never tell a simple story. Each side presents their own version of events, stamped with legal language sharpened into accusations and denials. What makes this one so explosive is not only the money at stake, it is the emotional weight behind the names. When you see Priscilla and Lisa Marie and Riley appear in these pages, you are not just reading a business dispute. You are staring into the private tensions of a family that has already lived through more grief than most people can imagine. That raises a deeper question. How did the Presleys reach a point where their most personal heartbreaks are laid out in court filings, where the public can scroll through their arguments about love, loyalty, and trust as if they were reading a script for a drama series? This is not something that happened overnight. It is the result of decades of decisions, promises, and fears that began long before any modern lawsuit ever existed. To understand why this latest case matters, you have to trace the line backward. You have to go from this present moment of accusations and counter-accusations back to the trust battle between Priscilla and Riley that erupted after Lisa Marie's death, and even further back to the day Vernon Presley sat with a pen in his shaking hand and chose who would protect Elvis's estate after he was gone. Each legal document that exists now grew out of a conversation or a conflict that once took place inside a family, not inside a courtroom. There is another layer that makes all of this even more painful. When people see the phrase "massive family secret" in a headline, they often imagine something wild and cinematic, a hidden heir, a secret marriage, a locked box in an attic. What the lawsuits around the Presleys have begun to expose is something quieter and, in many ways, far more devastating. It is the reality that relationships inside this family were far more fractured than the public ever knew. Because long before this new lawsuit was filed, long before lawyers for former partners wrote harsh paragraphs about Priscilla, Lisa Marie Presley made a choice about her own mother. It was a decision that did not play out on a stage or in a press conference. It lived in legal wording and private conversations. Almost no one outside a tight circle knew it was there. And when that choice finally surfaced, it changed the way many people saw every photograph of them standing together. When Elvis died in August of 1977, the world saw a nation in mourning. Inside the Presley family, something even more fragile was happening. Vernon Presley, already worn down by age and grief, suddenly held a responsibility that terrified him. He was no business strategist. He was a father who had just buried his son. And now he was expected to keep that son's entire world from collapsing in on itself. The numbers were brutal. Taxes, unpaid bills, and bad contracts had turned the glittering Elvis empire into a maze of obligations. Graceland was not just a famous house, it was a money drain that seemed to grow heavier every month. Vernon understood one thing very clearly. If he made the wrong choice, the home his son had loved could be gone forever, and the little girl Elvis adored would inherit more problems than protection. In those last years of his life, Vernon made a decision that would echo through decades. He named trustees he believed would fight for the estate after he was gone. Among them was a woman who had known Elvis as a husband, not just as a headline. Priscilla would not inherit everything, but she would carry a kind of moral authority. She knew the man behind the myth. She understood the weight that land on Elvis Presley Boulevard carried. When Vernon died, that responsibility became real. Priscilla now stood at a crossroads that almost no one outside the family could fully see. Advisors came with charts, warnings, and simple answers. The numbers made a cold kind of sense. Sell Graceland while it still had value. Walk away from the bleeding costs and move forward with a cleaner balance sheet. From a practical view, it looked like survival. From an emotional view, it felt like betrayal. Priscilla chose the harder path. Instead of selling, she listened to a different idea, one that sounded shocking at the time. What if Graceland opened its gates to the public and invited fans to walk the same halls Elvis once walked? What if tickets, tours, and souvenirs could pay the taxes that were threatening to swallow the estate whole? It meant turning private grief into a public attraction, but it also meant giving Elvis's home a chance to sustain itself. That choice changed everything. When the first tours began, no one knew if people would come. They did more than come. They lined up. They brought their stories, their records, their memories of seeing Elvis on television or in person. Graceland stopped being just a house. It became a living museum, a pilgrimage site, and a financial engine strong enough to keep the Presley name on firm ground. Priscilla had taken a risk, and it paid off. In the eyes of many fans, that was the moment she became more than an ex-wife. She became the guardian of Elvis's world. The calm figure in black at memorial events was also the woman in meetings, budgets spread out on the table, trying to make sure that the estate did not drown. That role put her at the center of every important decision, from licensing deals to marketing campaigns. It gave her power, but it also gave her responsibility that never really ended. During all of this, Lisa Marie was growing up. To the outside world, she was the child who had lost her father and lived in the shadow of his legend. Inside the business structure, she was the future owner of the very empire her mother was helping to stabilize. That created a strange dual reality. At home, they were mother and daughter, struggling through ordinary arguments and extraordinary grief. On paper, they were also partners linked by contracts, trusts, and corporate documents. As Lisa Marie reached adulthood, control began to shift, at least in theory. Trusts that had once been built for her started to come under her direct influence. Managers came and went. New advisors brought new strategies, sometimes clashing With the old guard who had helped Priscilla, the estate no longer moved only according to one woman's instincts. It moved according to a network of professionals, all with their own ideas about what was best. Behind every new agreement, some kind of conversation took place. A signature on a document might follow a heated phone call, a tearful dinner, or a tense meeting where money and memory collided. The public saw only the results. Another deal, another company name, another announcement about the future of Elvis's image. Inside the family, each change left emotional fingerprints that never fully faded. Over time, the very thing that made Priscilla central to the story also made her a target when things went wrong. As long as the estate prospered, she was praised as the woman who saved Graceland. When financial storms rose around Lisa Marie, when questions surfaced about missing millions and disastrous investments, it was easy for some people to point back to the person who had been involved from the beginning. By the time Lisa Marie was wrestling with her own money problems and trust decisions, she was no longer just the little girl in the photographs at Graceland. She was a mother, an artist, and the legal owner of a complex estate that her mother had helped build and shape. That mixture of love, dependence, and resentment was volatile. It meant that when mother and daughter disagreed, they were not simply clashing over family matters. They were clashing over a kingdom that Elvis had left behind. And in the years to come, that division would not stay private. It would begin to show up in wills, trusts, and eventually in the very lawsuits that would push their names back into the headlines. By the time most people really noticed Lisa Marie Presley, she was already carrying more weight than anyone could see from a distance. To the world, she was Elvis's only child, the dark-haired girl who grew into a woman with the same eyes and the same haunted half-smile. Who legally controlled her estate? Not long after the funeral, Priscilla filed a petition in court. She challenged the validity of that 2016 amendment, the one that had removed her as a future trustee. The document, she argued, had problems. Her name was misspelled. Her signature style did not match. Formal requirements were not followed. To her, it looked like Lisa Marie's wishes had been altered in a way that raised too many questions to ignore. To others, it looked like a grandmother trying to push herself back into power. Riley, suddenly thrust into the spotlight as the named trustee, was left in an almost impossible position. She had just buried her mother. Now she had to defend a legal document that gave her control, while also preserving some kind of relationship with a grandmother she had grown up loving. The battle did not drag on forever. Eventually, both sides reached a settlement. Public statements talked about harmony. Riley became the sole trustee of her mother's estate. Priscilla received a financial arrangement and a more ceremonial role. On the surface, the feud seemed over. To many fans, that felt like the end of the story. The trust dispute was resolved. Control of Graceland and the Presley brand had a clear line of succession. The headlines moved on, yet inside sealed folders and ongoing legal strategies, the story was still alive. Some people close to the situation believed that Priscilla was not the wounded party at all. In their version, she had always been the strategist, the one steering events to her advantage. They were not content to whisper that belief in private. They were preparing to put it into their own lawsuit and force their accusations into the open. When the newest lawsuit hit the news cycle, it did not arrive like a quiet footnote at the end of the Presley story. It landed like a fresh crack across glass that was already strained, raising the same uneasy question that had followed this family for decades. Where does protection end and exploitation begin? In this case, the accusations did not come from tabloid writers or distant critics. They came from people who had once been close enough to call themselves partners. In their complaint, they painted a portrait of Priscilla Presley that clashed sharply with the dignified, controlled figure fans were used to seeing at anniversaries and memorials. They claimed she misrepresented what she owned and what she could promise. They suggested that behind closed doors, she was not a careful guardian of Elvis's legacy at all, but a calculating figure willing to bend the truth when money and control were on the line. Then their claims cut into the most sensitive territory of all, the final chapter of Lisa Marie's life. In their telling, the decisions made around her health, her estate, and her public image were not just tragic circumstances or honest misunderstandings. They hinted at a pattern of influence and self-interest, implying that Priscilla had put power and financial security above her daughter's well-being. On their own, those accusations would be heavy enough. But this is only one side of the story, sharpened into legal language for strategic effect. Priscilla did not respond with silence or vague denials. Through her attorneys, she went on record calling the lawsuit shameful and fundamentally false. In her version, these former partners were the ones who crossed the line, using her trust, her age, and her fame to enrich themselves. She did more than issue a statement. She filed her own elder abuse lawsuit, accusing them of manipulating her finances and turning her into a target when she began to push back. Suddenly, the narrative that looked so simple from the outside turned inside out. Depending on which set of papers you read, Priscilla was either the architect of manipulation or the victim of it. The same meetings, the same signatures, the same phone calls were described in completely different ways. That is the nature of lawsuits. They are not written to tell a balanced story. They are written to win. Caught in the middle of all of this, even now, is Lisa Marie. She is no longer here to confirm or deny anyone's version of events. What we have instead are fragments, financial records that show years of strain, lawsuits that document vast losses, letters that reveal how deeply she doubted the people around her. Even the story about her considering a lawsuit against her mother did not come from gossip. It surfaced in the middle of a legal explanation, brought into the light because someone needed to prove a point to a judge. Taken together, those pieces do not give us a neat conspiracy theory. They offer something more complicated and, in many ways, more heartbreaking. They suggest a woman who never found solid ground between love and mistrust, who lived in a world where almost every relationship had a financial shadow attached to it. It is easy to talk about family secrets as if they are dramatic twists waiting to be revealed. Here, the secret looks more like a slow grinding truth. This family never really had a chance to heal in private. Every time they tried, something else dragged them back into the open. A new deal, a broken investment, a will, a trust, a petition filed in probate court. Each document pinned another piece of their internal life to the public record. For Lisa Marie, whose entire identity was wrapped in the name of a man billions of strangers adored, that must have felt like being taken apart under a spotlight she never got to turn off. This is the context in which the latest accusations against Priscilla exist, not as a clean revelation of good and evil, but as the newest chapter in a story where grief, money, memory, and power have been tangled together for almost half a century. There may come a day when a judge rules on who owes what to whom. That will answer some legal questions. It will not answer the one that really haunts fans. What would Lisa Marie have wanted? Would she have wanted her mother branded as a villain? Would she have defended the people now claiming to speak for her? Would she have wished that old drafts of lawsuits and private letters had stayed buried in desk drawers instead of being read aloud in courtrooms? We will never truly know. What we can see looking back over all these years is the cost of living inside a legend. Long after the last show at the International Hotel, long after the last recording session at Graceland, the pressure did not disappear. It shifted onto the shoulders of the people who loved Elvis most. Vernon felt it in his final decisions. Priscilla felt it every time she signed a new contract. Lisa Marie felt it every time her own mistakes and heartbreaks led back to the same headline: Elvis's daughter. In the end, the most painful secret may not be a hidden document or a single shocking decision. It may be the quiet realization that for Lisa Marie Presley, the price of carrying her father's name was never paid only in money. It was paid in trust, in peace, and in how her story would be argued, contested, and retold long after she was gone. If you are still listening, you are not just following lawsuits. You are trying to understand a family that never got to be ordinary. Share in the comments where you find yourself in this story and which chapter of the Presley legacy you want to explore with care next.